The Garden Creek, Mount Pisgah Corpus, a documentary evidence narrative. Barrows Research, Institute of Natural Philosophy. Version 1.17, August 2026. This narrative consolidates and supersedes all prior narrative statements of the documentary record in this project. Quotations from 19th century manuscripts follow the project's working transcriptions, combined chronological correspondence, V7, and remain subject to verification against the page images. Entry numbers cited below refer to that compilation. Evidence is graded proven-strong/supported-unresolved-contradicted with named falsifiers, and no claim is advanced where the sources are silent. Interpretive conclusions are identified separately from documentary facts so that institutional context does not substitute for object-level proof. What? Scope, sources, and method. The subject is the corpus of carved and modeled objects collected in and around Haywood County, North Carolina, between 1879 and 1894, approximately 978 objects in steatite soapstone, plorai, red and white sandstone, mica schist, and fired clay pottery, including heat-altered pieces in which talc has converted toward instantite D about 800 to 900 degrees C conversion that surface treatment cannot replicate, now dispersed across the Valentine Museum, Richmond V7501, the National Museum of Natural History Accession 014255, a London Ledger Corpus, the University of North Carolina Research Laboratories of Archaeology, and, through George G. Hayes' 1915 purchases, the National Museum of the American Indian, together with the archival record that documents the corpus's contested institutional history, collected, found, dug, and bought for the Valentine family's developing Richmond Museum, and then challenged through Smithsonian-directed comparison purchases and later federal classifications. The Valentine family experienced those actions, in its own contemporaneous words, as interference with the work that we have started and an attempt to be us on our own ground. Those statements establish the family's perception and the fact of institutional conflict. They do not, by themselves, establish the federal actor's ultimate motive. The principal documentary sources are the A. T. Osborne Papers SHC 2837, UNC Southern Historical Collection, the Valentine Papers UNC RLA Act 2156-08, transcribed via Steer 2019, Smithsonian Institution Archives Accession 13191, and the Emerd Correspondence File RU000029, Box 2, Folder 14B. The Bureau's Fiscal Record in NARA RG 217 First Auditor, Settled Miscellaneous Treasury Accounts, Entry 347, Account 237,177, with the Certification Ledger, Entry 346, Vol. 110, the NMNH Collections Database, the Richmond Dispatch of August 23, 1883, Cyrus Thomas's 12th Annual Report 1894, George G. Hayes' Certain Mounds in Haywood County, North Carolina 1919, and the published record of the 1965 to 1967 UNC excavations and Alice Wright's 2011 to 2012 investigations of the Garden Creek Site Group. The controlling analytical model throughout is a mixed corpus requiring object-by-object resolution. The documents below prove purchases, prices, names, custody, and institutional beliefs. They do not, by themselves, prove or disprove the antiquity of any individual object, and both blanket authentication and blanket fraud verdicts are rejected as unsupported. Institutional context. Official institutional histories sharpen that context. Congress created the Bureau of Ethnology in 1879 and named John Wesley Powell its first director. Under the Smithsonian, the Bureau was assigned a national repository role for records and material relating to Native North America. The United States National Museum opened its new building in 1881 as the Federal Museum of Record, with anthropology among its principal displays. During the same years, the Valentine family was assembling the private Richmond collection that later became the Valentine Museum, opened to the public in 1898 with a dedicated archaeology department. The 1883 episode therefore joined two expanding collecting programs with markedly unequal public authority, funding, custody, and publishing reach. That asymmetry supports describing as sustained institutional controversy or rivalry over access, classification, and credibility. It is not independent proof of a conspiracy or of a well-directed campaign to suppress the Valentine collection. Both programs also operated within 19th century collecting practices now recognized as ethically inadequate, especially where ancestral remains and funerary objects were concerned. Neither institution's authority can substitute for object-level evidence. Smithsonian Institution Archives, Major John Wesley Powell, and United States National Museum, 1881 to 1911. The Valentine, the Early Valentine Museum, 1898 to 1930. The place, a real and major site. The find spots named throughout the collecting correspondence, Burnett's Hill and Miller's Hill, reach through the gap between Haywood and Buncombe counties, beside the plot farms at the forks of the Pigeon River, belong to the Garden Creek Site Group near Canton State Designation P83, Sites 31HW1, 31HW2, HW8 and related numbers. This is not an inference of the project alone. The University of North Carolina's public synthesis states that excavations at Garden Creek began in the 1880s with Man S. Valentine, his sons, and their North Carolina agent A. Th. Osborne. Garden Creek Mount No. 131 HW1, fully excavated in 1965 to 1967, held two adjoining semi-subterranean earth lodges beneath a boulder cap and a Pisgah-phase platform, with a village midden of roughly 5 acres and a radiocarbon series running from Middle Woodland, Tennessee through Mississippi and Pisgah into a historic Qualla contact horizon that produced a cast bronze Bell GX 729. Mound No. 231 HW2 is a Tennessee phase platform associated with Hopewellian interaction. Mound No. 3 was excavated by Hay in 1915. Wright's geophysics later identified ditching closures and a fourth mound. The London Ledger's find spot tallies 49 entries at Burnett's Hill, 33 at Miller's Hill, 12 near Pisgah, thus attached to a genuine, dense, dated, and now fully published archaeological landscape. The identification of Burnett's Hill with the Garden Creek group is graded strong to proven at the level of locality. The specific equation with Mound No. 1 is the project's controlling hypothesis, supported by the architecture of a Valentine-era excavation photograph, but awaiting decisive tests, of which in 1878 to 1885 D-book identification of the Burnett and Miller tracks against the site footprints is the most powerful. 3. 1879 to 1882, the collecting operation, the attribution, and the first doubts. Through 1880 and 1881 the Valentine operation, directed from Richmond by Ben B. Valentine and worked on the ground by Osborne and paid local hunters, drew a stream of carved images from the two hills, and the documents of those years record that stream is collected. Objects found in the wash of the hill and dug from the ground at named places, with imitation appearing in the record only as an external attempt, detected and expelled, as the July 1881 letter below records. A later allegation that the stream had originated as market carving about 4 years before May 1883, that is, around 1879, appears in Emmer's reporting. Emmer was the Bureau's field investigator and the only identified principal reporting witness in the federal file reviewed here. His account is contemporaneous and transactionally linked to the 1883 purchases, but it has not yet been independently corroborated in the archives reviewed for this project. The name Pei and the hunters later denied the asserted manufacture. The claim is therefore evidence that must be weighed, not a settled fact, and Section 7 treats it accordingly. No 1879 to 1881 document records manufacture within the operation's accepted channel, and the 1879 date of the family's first letters lends the allegation nothing. Those letters mark the start of the collecting operation itself. General relic collecting, engaged statewide, with the carved image class nowhere yet in the record, so the overlap of dates is internally derived from Emmert's report and is not independent corroboration. The operation's purpose is stated in the family's own words from its first season. In July 1879, engaging Osborne, Valentine wrote that we are anxious to get up a good museum of these objects, wanting all other relics found on and in the ground, with a provenance instruction that is museum practice from the outset. Send us word where the things come from, that we may know how to label them. In April 1880 the money was spent gladly in obtaining and preserving these remnants of primitive arts. In May 1880, we are not buying and selling relics, but want them for ourselves, and some day to make a handsome show of them in this city. Each object placed on a glass case in the museum which they have helped us to make, the Osborne collection that, if fire does not destroy it, many years from now it will continue to be seen, some day, we hope, in a handsome building of this city. And the urgency was salvage, with the railroad named as the engine of loss. By August 1880, collections were coming off the new railroad along James River, whose cuts ran through many graves and old places. Valentine expected the same when they extend the North Carolina Railroad, and objects from a railroad open cave were to be secured before they are thrown away. The Richmond Museum, in the family's own framing, was where such things were to survive. The correspondence fixes the sequence, and a wall comes first. Through May 1880, Valentine presses Osborne for particulars of the walls, mounds, heaps, and whether there is or has been any cement between the joints of the wall. By late May, Burnet is returning to work over and around the wall again, and on June 11, Valentine acknowledges Osborne's letter of the 7th reporting completion. You went up to Pisgah and dug all the wall out. The fitted stone construction, with a skeleton in a stone box expected at its ends, was thus fully excavated by early June 1880 in the campaign that had put man S. Valentine Sr. himself on the ground, and it belongs to the same landscape of real stone architecture that Hay 1915 and UNC 1965 to 1967 would later document independently. Objects were already moving through those same weeks, a very remarkable variety in the shapes of the pots, cups by mid-May, and in June Valentine finds it strange and interesting, and near this wall is where the relics come from. The autumn letters then record a second locus and mechanism. On October 4, 1880, the images being found near the branch of Burnet's, from the gradual washing down of the earth from the hill, the slope and the branch below, after the season's digging, not the wall itself, and in November the directives to go right down to the original soil at the bottom of this hill and to test the other side. One question from the same weeks has been read, in later retellings, as early doubt. Why didn't Burnet find these things when he and father were at the wall? Edward Valentine, October 20, 1880, relayed by his brother to Osborne. The record does not fix its tone. As written, it is a locational question, and the letters themselves contain its answer. The wall and the branch are different places, and the autumn finds came by wash. After the season's digging, while nothing in the correspondence shows the question voiced as suspicion or pursued as one, the same Edward had been planning social calls with Burnet that July. The family's buying continued without pause, and the November letters direct deeper digging rather than inquiry. The question is preserved verbatim as the earliest in the record about the find's distribution, a question the correspondence answers, and it enters a skeptical ledger only if a reader supplies the tone the document does not. Into this operation, on December 15, 1880, comes the corpus's most important Cherokee attestation. Then B. Valentine writes Osborne from Richmond that last week, we had a Cherokee Indian, Chief Bushyhead, in this city, and I went to see him, and was with him a whole day. He lives in Nakinko and says that in the mountains of the western part of NC, they find the images, etc., and the medicine men use them to bring rain, etc. Valentine himself flags the language barrier. We might have misunderstood him. The speaker is identified as Chief Bushyhead of Sandtown, the post-removal Cherokee community on Cartoogetchee Creek in Macon County. A Sandtown leader of that name, George Bushyhead, is independently attested in the public record of the Eastern Band's formative period. The identification of this man with Principal Chief Dennis W. Bushyhead of the Cherokee Nation is contradicted by the letter's own residence statement, and the Eastern Band's principal chiefs in 1880 were Lloyd R. Welch and then Nimrod Jarrett Smith. Chief here is a community-level title carried by a named local leader. The attribution is second-hand and entered the record as prospecting intelligence within months man S. April 20, 1881 was driving instructions to dig more widely, but it is a genuine, dated Cherokee attributed use claim for the image class, and its date now carries a precise legal meaning. Secretary Teller's directive of December 2, 1882 and Commissioner Hiram Price's rules governing the Court of Indian Offenses, promulgated March 30, 1883, made the usual practices of medicine men punishable under Rule 6, the practice class to which this rain-making attribution would have belonged. The December 1880 statement therefore predates the federal rule. That chronology matters, but it does not make the second-hand attribution self-proving. It means that later statements to outside inquirers should be interpreted with the federal policy context in view. Neither the 1880 attribution nor the 1883 disclaimer should be treated as dispositive on its own. The operation also policed its own supply, and the letter of July 19, 1881 preserves its understanding of what had happened. Once the finds were known and valued, imitation followed. Valentine acknowledges that Osborne has discharged all the hunters except Burnett and Arthur Miller for attempting counterfeits of the images. The counterfeiting, in the operations account, was the work of others copying a class the family believed genuine and believed it could tell apart. It is well to let them know that you understand the difference between the real and the counterfeit objects, and the remedy was consolidation at a stroke. Every hunter dismissed except the two men the Valentines trusted, with the hope that Burnett and Miller may stumble on a good place and bring objects as last summer, and the prediction that the discharges will force them to stop counterfeiting. From mid-1881, then, the record shows an imitation problem attributed to others and dated after the finds became known, as supply chain deliberately narrowed to Burnett and Miller as the trusted men, and a family confident, rightly or wrongly, in its own connoisseurship. Each of those three facts bears on everything that follows. In 1882, Charles Rao of the Smithsonian rendered the first institutional adverse judgment on the class. The Valentines' correspondence shows they knew Washington considered theirs a country of frauds by the spring of 1883. 1883, the Bureau's comparison purchases, the fiscal record, the market context of early 1883 matters to what followed. On March 29, 1883, Valentine notes that Buchanan, the Webster merchant who had formerly collected relics for the operation, has a collection. He wanted to sell to him for $25, more than the family had been paying for just such a lot of objects, and in the same letter directs Osborne to get the pipes that Will Rickerman was to make for him, adding it would be just as well to have some other specimens of what these modern Indians are making, so as to compare them with the old ones we have. An assembled lot of relics, the origin of its contents undetermined, collected or made, could change hands at about $25. An openly modern carving was commissioned from named contemporary makers as comparison material. The price level and the comparison genre were both established in this very network before the Bureau moved. The origin of the objects in any such lot was not thereby established, and is not assumed here. The Bureau's episode is now documented end to end, and its target is defined in Emmert's own opening report's dossier transcriptions, per the August 2026 Evidence Review. On April 6 he told Thomas he had found Mount Pisgah and heard the country had already been hunted for specimens by a Richmond man, and on April 11 that after several days on Pisgah he had failed to find any of the specimens described by Mr. Valentine, turning at once to persons said to be making images for Mr. V.'s agent. The reference set, in other words, was Valentine's described specimens, and the makers drew federal attention because of their reported Valentine connection. On April 13, the same date as Thomas's instruction to Emmert, a letter not yet located, Granville G. Valentine wrote Osborne that the Smithsonian has sent an agent to Pisgah to interfere with work that we have started. Thomas's instruction drew Emmert's reply from Asheville on April 17. It so happened that one of the men who wanted to furnish my relics was at the post office when I got your letter. I told him I wanted some of his skillful work, that you would not know the difference will get him to make all he can. Now please have me $30 here by return mail. I will take his receipt for the amount paid for each piece will come back here on 21st for the money you send. Treasury check no. $137,993 for $30 was cut in Washington on April 19. On April 24, at Asheville, J. O. Burnett signed an itemized receipt for 21 carved objects, images, bears, pipes, pots, mugs, birds, totaling $28.50, which with $1.50 packing and shipping equals the $30 to the cent. Cyrus Thomas personally certified the voucher. The prices paid were just and reasonable. On April 25, Emmert reported the shipment to Major Powell and added it. In both the retained copy and the original, the men say Mr. Valentine had them to make his specimens and bury them, and that he afterwards came back with other men and had them dug up. Emmert's May 14 letter to Baird promised to have your specimens done within days and asked for the purchase money, the May lot, like the April lot, answering a standing order. On May 15, Baird formally requested all the information you can obtain as to the business of manufacturing the soapstone implements under a written pledge. Under no circumstances will your name be mentioned in connection therewith. A Western Union telegram of May 19, money goes by today's mail, preceded the second purchase. Sub-voucher No. 1, receipted at Asheville on May 21, 1883 by the same J. Oh, Burnett for 15 soapstone specimens at $1.462 each, $22. Emmert shipped the box by express from Asheville on May 24 with a letter that reports the makers have been manufacturing them for 4 years, selling only to Mr. V, his agent, and a small lot to a man living in South Carolina. Notes that Valentine's agent had tried both by threats and promises to keep them from letting me have them, and closes with the field half of the anonymity pledge. These men give this information with the understanding that their names should never be used. The name the Bureau never published survives because Treasury require signed receipts, and the Valentine side reached it independently. Benjamin Valentine's same-day letter of May 24 to Mrs. Osborne, complaining that a national institution should not come in and help us to reap the benefit of our foundation work, asked specifically whether Burnett and Miller had sold objects to the Smithsonian Agent 02A370009 transcription. Per the evidence review, the family naming, contemporaneously and without sight of the vouchers, the same two men the Treasury paper records. Howell stands inside the chain at its receiving end. The April shipment went by express to Madge. Howell. 1 day later, on April 26, Powell's office directed that field collections of government organizations pass to the National Museum, and on May 21, the date of the second Burnett receipt, Pilling repeated the custody rule under Powell's direction. Usk's letters sent, M152 Roll 4, B1L040 and B1L093. Neither memorandum names Valentine or the Burnett objects. They document the custody system into which the comparison specimens could flow, and their dates closely overlap with the purchase sequence. The production requests, shipments, confidential inquiry, payments, and federal custody arrangements are documented. A written statement that the Bureau's purpose extended beyond testing reported imitation manufacture to discrediting the Valentine collection as a rival enterprise or to implementing the Code of Indian Offenses has not been located. Those remain bounded motive hypotheses, not documentary findings, pending the instruction-level records named in the August 2026 evidence review. The purchases map onto the National Museum's catalog with precision. The May lot of 15 is Block B, A83382 through A83396. 15 records entered descriptively, figure carved in soapstone matching original register numbers 2063 to 2080 with the shipment's 3-item tail. The April lot of 21 answers Block A, A82437 through A82457, a 21 number span holding 20 records with A82454 vacant. The block entered as imitation of Indian carving, a label that occurs nowhere else in a 2815 record regional export. A later hand-struck Block B's descriptive entry and interlineated fraudulent antiquity. The composition of the April lot remains open and is stated as such. Newly made work answering Thomas's instruction. Pieces already in the seller's hands, whether previously made or previously found and collected, or a mixture, the 7 days between commission and receipt, and the Buchanan Comparandum, keep every reading alive. What the transaction does not document is up to the seller or data, and what the libel documents depends on the unresolved composition. If the lot was newly made to the commission, the Bureau asked for admittedly modern skilled work, paid market prices, certified them reasonable, and entered the lot as what it had ordered. The comparison purchase genre the Valentines themselves practiced. If the lot was collected material of the kind then changing hands at about $25, then imitation of Indian carving is not a description the seller supplied, but a category the Bureau imposed at intake, a recategorization of a purchase collection. The Bureau's own annual report for 1883 states the assignment plainly. Amherst was employed investigating the manufacture of imitations of ancient relics in western North Carolina. Because imitation manufacture was the assigned investigative category, that assignment is relevant to how acquisitions were selected and cataloged. The label establishes the program's classification. It does not, without object-level evidence, independently establish each object's origin. and the era's only described aging mechanism. The Emmert-era claim that soft stone was soaked in ferruginous water to look old, joined to the report of burial for staged recovery, has already met a material test. The corpus includes truly fired ceramic and steatite whose talc has converted toward enstatite, a through-body transformation of roughly 800 to 900 degrees C that water immersion cannot produce and that no account in the record ever describes. Heat, by contrast, appears repeatedly across independent portions of the record. On August 10, 1880, the operation's second season, Valentine writes that many of these have been burned, directs the hunters to watch for heated or blackened object at the bottom of the graves, asks after a hearth there, or ashes in which they might have been laid and burned, and ventures his own reading of a deliberate conflagration. Things gathered together and fires applied, and everything that could burn was consumed as stone objects of soapstone and others of the yellow and black earths. That November, the woman opening graves for the operation reported evidence of fire in the graves she opened. 5 coals lay at 2.5 feet in the wash below the wall, and by the winter of 1880 Osborne's mound cut had struck a perfect hard floor or hearth 20 feet long and 5 inches thick, its center filled with ashes, coal, and seemingly burnt bones, with 7 skeletons beyond and a pile of ashes. Hayes' 1915 floor in the adjacent mound held charcoal, ash, and burnt bone through 17 pits, and the objects carry soot, fire cracking, and the enstatite conversion to the present day. No 19th century account reviewed here attributes high temperature alteration to the alleged makers. The only aging method expressly alleged was ferruginous water, where underlying analytical data verify thermal alteration of a particular object. Ferruginous water aging cannot explain that condition. This limits the alleged method's explanatory reach, but it does not, by itself, establish the date, depositional history, or authenticity of the object. 1883, the Kuala Leg, the Smith custody node, in the Rule 6 context. In the summer of 1883, Benjamin and Edward Valentine made a roughly 900-mile western North Carolina expedition, headquartered on the Kuala boundary with Nimrod J. Smith, principal chief of the Eastern Band 1880 to 1891, and excavated a large mound in Swain County, 5 skeletons photographed in situ, a conch shell mask, a copper bead, a hooded clay head, a 12-person crew over 10 days. Richmond Dispatch, August 23, 1883, a press paraphrase of an interview and graded accordingly. The chain of custody for that leg runs through the band's own government. Ben Valentine's letter of September 23, 1884 records that these we left with Chief N. Smith to send to you for us. Chief Smith said that he has the boxes at his house, said he left some money with the Smiths to pay for the hauling. A documented bailment of the Swain mortuary assemblage in the principal chief's personal custody for at least 13 months, its completion to Richmond still unresolved in the record. The Eastern Band is therefore a documented party to this corpus's custody history, and every question touching the Swain material, burials, funerary objects, and the in-situ photographs sits inside a consultation framework with the Ebside Tribal Historic Preservation Office. The same August 1883 press account reports Kuala elders saying they know absolutely nothing about the images and had no legends regarding them. That statement should be preserved and assessed, not dismissed. It was recorded 4.5 months after promulgation of Commissioner Hiram Price's rules governing the Court of Indian Offenses, whose 6th rule made the usual practices of medicine men punishable. No Court of Indian Offenses has yet been documented at the Eastern Cherokee Agency, however, and enforcement of Rule 6 at Kuala has not been established. The policy environment therefore supplies relevant context, not proof that these particular speakers concealed knowledge. The sequence, an attributed acknowledgement in 1880 and a disclaimer in 1883, is consistent with protective reticence, but genuine unfamiliarity with the Haywood image class and community difference remain live alternatives. Accordingly, the 1883 disclaimer should not be treated as a simple, unqualified disproof of the 1880 attribution, nor should the legal context hypothesis erase the disclaimer's evidentiary value. 1884, Emmert Season and the Genuine Mound Letter. Rehired to begin explorations on January 1, 1884, Emmert reported from Asheville on February 17, Since my arrival in NC, I have opened 5 mounds, some large ones. Described a mound in Haywood County 30 miles from here measuring about 200 feet in length, about 60 ft wide and 15 ft high. There is no doubt of its being a genuine mound. Asked advice before opening it, and noted plenty of smaller mounds both on the Pigeon River. The Bureau's own field investigator thus judged a major pigeon drainage Haywood Mound genuine during the controversy. That observation supports the reality of a substantial archaeological landscape in the drainage. It does not authenticate the disputed carved corpus or identify the described mound as one of the Garden Creek mounds. Thomas directed a test pit. No record shows the Bureau ever excavating the Garden Creek cluster. The Buncombe County work left its physical trace inside accession 014255 itself. 5 objects, A91624 through A91628. Collector Emmert, site name Mound 10, a numbered series reaching double digits. The season migrated to Union County, Tennessee by April 8, when Emmert proposed the Tow River country and then down Lindell River to the Catawba. No one has yet explored that country, and closed on April 15, 1,884 with $52 in signed vouchers. The Tow River proposal, declined for funds, was executed privately. NMNH accession 0189071 1887 records Emmert as donor of a Yancey to Mitchell to Carter to Sullivan collection, including a Yancey Potstone vessel fragment of exactly the class he had described in the rock houses in May 1883. 1885 to 1886, the controversy, the Burnett paper, and the letter poll. By mid-1885, man S. Valentine S.R. could write that the Smithsonian men and Hidden have called them frauds, that the institution was simply saying that they have receipts of the men and they will not tell who they are, and that a young lawyer might for $10 take the hunters' depositions in regard to the finding of the objects. In December 1885, Rao renewed the charge in a Washington newspaper interview. Valentine wrote Baird demanding proof. Now, who sold the carvings to the agent? And will he take oath that he made them? And Baird referred the letter to Rao and to Cyrus Thomas to answer. On February 12, 1886, Osborne forwarded the paper from J. L. Murray. Valentine's reply of February 16 records its substance. Burnett states that it is a mistake about his having given a receipt to the Smithsonian agent. Valentine wonders whether some of the other hunters may have sold them objects and given receipts. Burnett could not recall the agent's name, Rogan or Spanrao, perhaps. Neither is Emmert, and the letter preserves both the hunters' standing denial. Osborne's household had confidence in them when they said they did not make them, and Valentine's own mixed reality concession. Let them say then whether they found part and made others. The same letter contests Burnett's literacy in both directions. You say that Burnett wrote the paper you sent me himself. I thought he could not write. The Treasury papers render the payee's name inconsistently. The April vouchers clerk entry reads J. L. Burnett. The May vouchers reads S. L. Burnett, and the 2 receipt signatures vary in form. Those variations warrant comparison, but visual nonconformity alone cannot establish who signed. The open question requires known exemplars, especially the surviving 1886 Burnett paper, the Bureau's duplicate receipts, and the 1880 census literacy evidence, and, ideally, qualified handwriting review. Until then, clerk completion, ordinary signature variation, and third-party signing remain alternatives rather than conclusions. 5 weeks after Burnett's paper, on March 23, 1886, the 5 Emmert letters of April 25 through May 14, 1883 were delivered from the files to Professor Baird, the institution re-examining its evidence to answer the Valentine to Burnett challenge, and some were returned to Thomas per Baird's letter of April 5, 1886. Valentine's inquiry in the same season also produced a 33-piece motif list of the Smithsonian's Haywood carvings, cup-shaped forms, birds, bears, pipes, smoking, and composite figures, whose crosswalk against the voucher itemizations and the surviving catalog numbers is a standing instrument. The evidentiary consequence can be stated without deciding the disputed facts. The manufacturer and salting account rests primarily on Emmert's reporting, contemporaneous, twice recorded, and transactionally interlocked with the fiscal paper, but with no independently identified eyewitness corroborator in the reviewed record. Emmert's Bureau employment creates a potential interest to disclose, not a basis to disregard his account. Burnett's 1,886 denial and the Hunter's standing denials conflict with it. Rouse and Hidden's judgments and Thomas's 1,894 publication support the Bureau's conclusion, unless separate factual bases are located. However, those later institutional judgments may reflect the same investigative episode rather than independent corroboration. Edward Valentine's October 1880 wall question, sometimes enlisted as early internal doubt, is answered within the correspondence itself and carries no independent weight. Section 3. The 1881 counterfeit episode cuts both ways. It establishes that imitation of the found class arose in the wider Hunter pool once the objects were known and valued, and it records the operation's contemporaneous judgment that Burnett and Miller stood outside the behavior. The record is genuinely split, the Salting claim is graded unresolved contested, and the corpus question devolves, as the controlling model requires, to the object level, where laboratory work proceeds under separate cover and under a data transparency rule. No determination, commercial or in-house, is relied on in this project unless its backing measurement data are available for independent audit. Certificates without data, whatever their direction, are held as unverified pending that release. A standard the project set before the work was commissioned. The March 2025 request that reporting followed the Geological Society of America's Luminescence Guide and whose satisfaction is now formally pending with the issuing laboratory technical file requested 13 July 2026, acknowledged 15 and 25 July, under review. At 1887 to 1894, aftermath and publication. Emmert's later Bureau seasons produced the Monroe County Collection Accession 017928, September 1886, and the Knox to Loudon to Roan Material Accession 024012, February 1891. Cyrus Thomas published the Haywood episode in the 12th Annual Report 1894 at page 347. The same parties who stated they had made articles for Mr. Valentine made quite a number of similar articles for the Bureau, illustrated at figures 225 to 227 as bogus article. Haywood County, North Carolina, 36 articles by the receipts. No informant named. The anonymity pledge kept on both sides of the ledger to the end. 1915 to the present. Hay, Unk, and the 5 repositories. George Hay's 1915 expedition dug the third mound at the Forks published 1919, recorded that the previously worked mound had been explored in 1880 by Mr. Man S. Valentine for the Valentine Museum, tabulated 17 fire pits with mica in the mound floor. Data rights reanalysis later folded into the Garden Creek sequence as Mound No. 3, and, in a closing note that matters to this corpus, collected from the locality's surface and residents a variety of steatite ornaments, a large number of small discs of steatite, and steatite pipes from the small trade pipe formed to the large and massive L-shaped variety ornamented with carving, the locality still yielding carved steatite to a museum buyer 3 decades after the verdicts. The 1965 to 1967 UNC Salvage Excavations and Rights 2011 to 2012 program complete the 3-layer record. 1880s Collectors, 1915 Museum Excavation, Modern Scientific Archaeology that converges on the same deliberate stone architecture, mortuary landscape, and long occupation the collecting letters describe from their own vantage. Objects and records from this one landscape now sit in 5 repositories: the Valentine Museum, the National Museum of Natural History, the London Ledger Corpus, the UNC Research Laboratories of Archaeology, and the National Museum of the American Indian. Where the questions stand, proven on the documents, the 2 1883 Bureau purchases, their dates, sums, itemizations, and the payee name J. Burnett. Thomas's certifications, the anonymity pledge on both sides, the block structure of accession 014255 and the register correction over block B, the Valentine operations presence at Garden Creek from 1880, the 1881 counterfeit discharges with Burnett and Miller retained, the Chief N. Smith custody of the 1883 Swain material, the March 1886 letter pull inside the route of Valentine to Burnett episode, and the reality, density, and dating of the fine spot landscape. Strong, the April lot's identity with block appending the A82454 carded. Burnett's Hill and Miller's Hill as parcels of the Garden Creek group. the Sandtown identification of the 1880 attribution speaker, and the direction of the 1883 comparison campaign specifically at the Valentine described image class and the supply network feeding it, rather than at soapstone objects in general, supported institutional interpretation with a defined boundary. The investigation targeted the Valentine described class and its supply network. The family contemporaneously described the intervention as interference, and the Bureau purchased, classified, retained, and later published objects under an imitation framework. Together, those facts support describing a sustained institutional controversy or rivalry over access, classification, and credibility. They do not yet prove a Powell-directed effort to suppress the Valentine Museum or a Code of Indian Offenses motive. Supported as controlling hypothesis, the equation of Burnett's Hill with Mount No. 131 HW1, deeds decisive, unresolved and stated so, whether the April lots objects were newly made, or previously found and collected, and in what proportion, whether Burnett personally executed the receipts, whether the salting account is fact, partial fact, or Emmert's construction, whether the Swain boxes reached Richmond, the antiquity of any individual object, which only the object-by-object program can decide, and whether institutional purpose extended beyond the comparison test to discrediting the Valentine collection as a rival enterprise, or under any coupling to the Code of Indian Offenses, both held as motive inferences pending instruction-level records, contradicted. The identification of the 1880 Chief Bushyhead with Principal Chief D.W. Bushyhead, blanket verdicts in either direction over the corpus as a whole.